In suburban Connecticut, 63-year-old Karen Williams prepared what would be her last breakfast as an invisible servant. When her entitled son declared her just furniture, she had no idea this cruel moment would change everything. Karen wasn't your typical dismissed housewife. For 20 years, she'd managed every family detail, but beneath her quiet servitude lay a former marketing executive's sharp mind. When she discovered the inherited house deed bore only her name, Karen realized she held unexpected power. Her family expected the furniture to stay put. Instead, they'd learn some furniture fights back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The kitchen timer chimed at 6:15. Same as it had every morning for the past 23 years. Karen Williams moved through her domain with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had choreographed this routine down to the second. Steam rose from the coffee maker, dark roast for Richard, medium for Derek, though neither would acknowledge the thought she put into these small preferences. Her hands, once manicured for boardroom presentations, now bore the permanent marks of domestic service: a small scar from the mandolin, calluses from years of dishwashing, the slight tremor that came with 63 years of life. She cracked eggs into the cast iron skillet, their sizzle filling the silence that had become her constant companion. Through the window above the sink, she could see Rosa Delgado's kitchen light glowing in the house next door. Rosa, who'd somehow managed to rebuild her life after her divorce. Rosa, who traveled to Spain last month and sent postcards that made Karen's chest tight with something she couldn't name. "Mom, this coffee tastes burnt." Derek's voice cut through her reverie. He slouched at the kitchen island in yesterday's clothes, his dark hair sticking up at angles that suggested he'd fallen asleep on the couch again. At 25, he still moved through their house with the casual entitlement of a teenager, expecting meals to appear and problems to disappear without his participation. "I'll make a fresh pot," Karen replied automatically, already reaching for the carafe. "Don't bother. I'll grab something on the way to my interview." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Karen's hands stilled on the coffee maker. She'd seen the credit card statement yesterday. Charges at GameStop and DoorDash, nothing that suggested job hunting. "Which interview is that?" she asked carefully. "The marketing thing, downtown." Derek didn't look up from his phone, his thumb scrolling with the focused intensity he reserved for social media. Marketing. The word hit Karen like a physical blow. Once, she lived and breathed marketing, had understood the pulse of consumer behavior better than her own heartbeat. She'd built campaigns that moved millions of dollars, had a corner office with windows that overlooked Hartford's skyline, had worn power suits, and commanded rooms full of executives who hung on her every word. Karen Chen, marketing director. That's what the nameplate had read before she became Karen Williams, before she'd folded herself into Richard's life and made herself smaller, quieter, less. "The eggs are perfect, as always," Richard's voice startled her back to the present. He stood by the counter, already dressed for court in his charcoal suit, checking his phone with the distracted air of a man whose mind was already downtown. At 64, he'd grown into his success like a well-tailored coat, comfortable and unaware of how it looked to others. Karen slid the plate across to him, watching as he took exactly 3 bites before checking his watch. "Running late," he announced to no one in particular, grabbing his briefcase and coffee mug in the fluid motion of someone who had performed this exit thousands of times. "Richard," Karen's voice caught his attention for a millisecond. "Derek's interview." "That's great, son. Knew you'd land something." Richard's smile was brief, automatic. "Karen, I'll be late tonight. The Morrison case is going to trial." He was already moving toward the garage, leaving Karen with words unspoken and the familiar ache of being unheard. The door clicked shut, followed by the rumble of his BMW backing out of the driveway. Derek had vanished too, probably back to his room and the gaming setup that cost more than Karen's car. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle bubbling of the forgotten eggs. Karen scraped the untouched breakfast into the garbage disposal, watching 20 minutes of careful preparation disappear down the drain. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. She'd been disappearing down various drains for decades. One unnoticed meal, one dismissed concern, one "not now, Karen" at a time. The house felt cavernous in its emptiness, filled with the accumulated weight of her family's absence even when they were present. She moved through the rooms like a curator in a museum of her own diminished expectations, straightening throw pillows that no one saw, dusting surfaces that no one touched, maintaining a showcase for a life that felt increasingly like performance art. In the living room, family photos chronicled their journey from young marriage to the strange middle age of parallel lives. Richard's promotion celebrations, Derek and Lily's graduations, family vacations where everyone smiled for the camera while living in separate bubbles of attention. Karen searched the images for herself, finding a woman who grew progressively smaller in each frame, literally stepping back to make room for others to shine. The silence drove her upstairs to the attic, where dust motes danced in the afternoon light filtering through a small window. She'd come up here to look for Christmas decorations, but found herself drawn to a box she hadn't opened in years. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid, revealing the artifacts of her former self. Awards, plaques, newspaper clippings from successful campaigns, Marketing Executive of the Year, 1999. The crystal felt heavy in her hands, substantial in a way her current life wasn't. She remembered that night, the dinner, the speech she'd given, the way Richard had looked at her with something approaching awe. When had that look faded? When had she become furniture in her own life? A newspaper clipping caught her eye. Local executive launches campaign to support working mothers. Her own quote stared back at her. Every woman deserves to feel valued for her contributions, visible for her work, and supported in her ambitions. The irony tasted bitter in the back of her throat. Footsteps on the stairs broke her trance. "Mom! Mom, where are you?" Derek's voice carried the edge of irritation it held whenever her absence inconvenienced him. "Coming," she called, quickly closing the box and pushing it back into its corner. By the time she descended the attic stairs, she'd arranged her face into the patient expression her family expected, the one that suggested she had nothing better to do than wait for their needs. Derek stood in the hallway, still in rumpled clothes. "I need $40 for gas." "I thought you had an interview today." His eyes flicked away from hers. "It got moved to tomorrow." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Karen's hands stilled on the kitchen counter, her fingers gripping the granite edge. 23 years of careful words, of choosing peace over truth, of swallowing confrontation to preserve some illusion of family harmony. The weight of it all pressed against her lungs. "I saw the credit card statement, Derek. GameStop, DoorDash, Amazon. $67 at Best Buy yesterday when you were supposedly at an interview." His jaw set in the stubborn line that had driven his teachers to distraction since elementary school. "You're spying on me now." "I'm trying to understand why you're lying to us." "I'm not lying. I had to reschedule. Stop." The word came out sharper than she'd intended, surprising them both. Karen had rarely raised her voice to Derek, had spent years believing that gentle guidance would eventually shape him into the man she hoped he could become. Just stop lying. To me, to your father, to yourself. Derek's eyes narrowed. At 25, he still had the sullen beauty of extended adolescence, all sharp cheekbones and carefully tousled hair. But his expression held something uglier now, a resentment that had been festering beneath his charming surface. "You want to know the truth?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to the tone he'd used to torment his sister when they were younger. "The truth is, I don't want some soul-crushing office job where I sit in a cubicle for 40 years like Dad. The truth is, I'm figuring things out, and I don't need you breathing down my neck about every dollar I spend." "You're 25 years old, Derek. You've been figuring things out for 3 years while living in our house, eating our food, spending our money." "Our money?" His laugh held a bitter edge. "What money do you make, Mom? When was the last time you earned a single dollar?" The words hit like a slap. Karen felt her carefully constructed patience begin to crumble, replaced by something rawer and more dangerous. I've been running this household for 23 years, managing your schedules, your needs, your problems. That's not a job. That's just, I don't know, what you do. He waved his hand dismissively, as if her decades of service were background noise. It's not like you have anything else going on. The crack in Karen's chest split wider. She could feel her grandmother's voice echoing from memory. Never let anyone make you feel small, Karen. You're worth more than their comfort. I had a career before you were born, a successful career. Yeah, like 25 years ago. Things change, Mom. You can't live in the past forever. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Richard's return, his car door slamming, his briefcase hitting the counter in the mudroom. She heard his familiar routine, keys in the bowl, phone on the charger, the soft shuffle of expensive shoes on hardwood. Everything all right in here? Richard's voice carried the wary tone of a man who'd learned to recognize tension, but had never quite mastered addressing it. Dad, tell Mom she needs to stop micromanaging my life. Richard's eyes flicked between them, taking in Derek's defensive posture and Karen's rigid stance. This was familiar territory. Derek's problems requiring adult intervention, Karen bearing the emotional labor of family conflict while Richard retreated into the comfortable distance of neutrality. I'm sure you two can work this out, Richard said, his attention already drifting back to his phone. Derek, your mother just wants what's best for you. What's best for me is space to figure out my own path without constant judgment. Judgment? Is that what you call wanting to understand why you lied about having interviews? Why you're spending money we give you for job searching on video games instead? Jesus, Mom, it's not that big a deal. Derek's voice rose, taking on the whining quality that had always signaled his retreat into childhood when confronted with adult responsibilities. You act like I'm some kind of criminal for buying a few things. You lied to us. I protected your feelings. There's a difference. The audacity of it stole my breath. Here was my son, a grown man who'd never held a job for more than 6 months, who'd never paid rent or utilities or insurance, who'd never once in his adult life shouldered genuine responsibility, and he was framing his deception as kindness? Protected my feelings, I repeated slowly. Yeah, you worry too much, so I told you what you wanted to hear. It's not like it matters anyway. Doesn't matter? My voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that had once commanded boardrooms. Your future doesn't matter? Your honesty doesn't matter? What exactly does matter to you? He threw his hands up in exasperation. This is exactly why I don't tell you things. You blow everything out of proportion and turn it into some big, dramatic... I'm trying to have an adult conversation with my adult son about his responsibilities. Responsibilities? Derek's laugh was harsh now, all pretense of charm abandoned. You want to talk about responsibilities? What responsibilities do you have, Mom? You wake up, you make breakfast nobody asks for, you clean a house that doesn't need cleaning, you worry about problems that aren't really problems. That's not responsibility. That's just, I don't know, what you do. He waved his hand dismissively, as if her decades of service were background noise. It's not like you have anything else going on. The crack in Karen's chest split wider. She could feel her grandmother's voice echoing from memory. Never let anyone make you feel small, Karen. You're worth more than their comfort. I had a career before you were born, a successful career. Yeah, like 25 years ago. Things change, Mom. You can't live in the past forever. The kitchen fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Richard's return, his car door slamming, his briefcase hitting the counter in the mudroom. "Everything all right in here?" Richard's voice carried the wary tone of a man who'd learned to recognize tension, but had never quite mastered addressing it. "Dad, tell Mom she needs to stop micromanaging my life." Richard's eyes flicked between them, taking in Derek's defensive posture and Karen's rigid stance. This was familiar territory. Derek's problems requiring adult intervention, Karen bearing the emotional labor of family conflict, while Richard retreated into the comfortable distance of neutrality. "I'm sure you two can work this out," Richard said, his attention already drifting back to his phone. "Derek, your mother just wants what's best for you. What's best for me is space to figure out my own path without constant judgment." "Judgment? Is that what you call wanting to understand why you lied about having interviews? Why you're spending money we give you for job searching on video games instead? Jesus, Mom, it's not that big a deal." My voice rose, taking on the whining quality that had always signaled my retreat into childhood when confronted with adult responsibilities. "You act like I'm some kind of criminal for buying a few things. You lied to us. I protected your feelings. There's a difference." The audacity of it stole my breath. Here was my son, a grown man who'd never held a job for more than 6 months, who'd never paid rent or utilities or insurance, who'd never once in his adult life shouldered genuine responsibility, and he was framing his deception as kindness? "Protected my feelings," I repeated slowly. "Yeah. You worried too much, so I told you what you wanted to hear. It's not like it matters anyway." "Doesn't matter?" My voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that had once commanded boardrooms. "Your future doesn't matter? Your honesty doesn't matter? What exactly does matter to you?" He threw his hands up in exasperation. This is exactly why I don't tell you things. You blow everything out of proportion and turn it into some big, dramatic... I'm trying to have an adult conversation with my adult son about his responsibilities. Responsibilities? Derek's laugh was harsh now, all pretense of charm abandoned. "You want to talk about responsibilities? What responsibilities do you have, Mom? You wake up, you make breakfast nobody asks for, you clean a house that doesn't need cleaning, you worry about problems that aren't really problems. That's not responsibility, that's just busy work." Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Derek, maybe you should..." "No, Dad, she wants honesty. Here's honesty." He turned back to Karen, his eyes bright with the cruel energy of someone who'd found their target. "You want to feel important so badly that you create problems just so you can solve them? You want to feel needed so you hover over everyone trying to manage their lives? But the truth is, we'd all be fine without the constant mothering." The word came out like a curse. Karen felt each syllable like a physical blow. 23 years of love and sacrifice and invisible labor dismissed with a single contemptuous term. "Derek?" Richard's voice carried a warning now, finally registering the dangerous territory they'd entered. But Derek was beyond stopping, high on the power of finally saying what he'd apparently been thinking for years. "You want to know why I don't tell you about my job search? Because it's none of your business. You want to know why I take money for gas and spend it on other things? Because I'm an adult and I can make my own choices. You want to know why Dad works late and I stay in my room? Because being around you is exhausting, Mom. All the questions and the worry and the management of every tiny detail of our lives. You act like you're so essential, but the truth is you're just furniture. You're just there, taking up space, collecting dust, and furniture doesn't get to have opinions about what the people do." The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Richard's phone had gone dark in his hand. Derek's bravado flickered slightly. Perhaps he was beginning to understand that some words, once spoken, could never be taken back. "I'm going upstairs," Karen said simply. "I need to think." She walked past them both, her movements deliberate and precise. Behind her, she heard Richard's voice, low and urgent. "Derek, that was completely out of line." "Whatever, Dad. Someone had to say it." Karen climbed the stairs with the careful dignity of someone holding herself together through sheer will. At the top, she turned toward her bedroom, closing the door with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. In the quiet of her room, surrounded by photos of family vacations and graduation ceremonies and happier times, Karen Williams sat on the edge of her bed and felt the last of her accommodating nature crack clean through. "Furniture," he'd said. "Just furniture." She looked around the room, at the carefully coordinated colors she'd chosen, the photos she'd framed, the life she'd built around their comfort and happiness. For the first time in 23 years, she began to wonder what this space might look like if it was truly hers. Karen sat in the stillness of her bedroom, Derek's words echoing in the space between her heartbeats. Furniture. Just furniture. The phrase had lodged itself somewhere behind her ribs, sharp and persistent, like a splinter working its way deeper with each breath. She'd raised him, changed his diapers, nursed him through fevers, attended every school play and soccer game. She'd sacrificed her career, her ambitions, her very identity to shape him into a man. And in his eyes, she'd become nothing more than an object to be used and dismissed. The house settled around her with familiar creaks and sighs. 23 years of mortgage payments, of choosing paint colors and replacing appliances and making this place a home. 23 years of believing she belonged here, that her contributions mattered, that love and service would eventually be recognized and valued. How naive she'd been. Karen's hands trembled as she reached for the tissue box on her nightstand, then stopped. She wouldn't cry. Not yet. Crying was what the old Karen would do, the accommodating Karen, the one who absorbed every slight and swallowed every hurt to preserve the illusion of family peace. Instead, she stood and walked to her closet, pulling down the wooden chest from the top shelf. Her grandmother's chest, passed down when Eleanor moved to assisted living. Karen hadn't opened it in years, but something about this moment called for connection to stronger women, women who hadn't allowed themselves to be reduced to furniture. The hinges creaked as she lifted the lid, releasing the faint scent of lavender sachets and old paper. Inside lay the artifacts of her grandmother's carefully ordered life. Photographs, letters, legal documents. Grandma Rose had been meticulous about record-keeping, a habit born from growing up during the Depression when documentation could mean the difference between security and destitution. Karen's fingers found a manila envelope marked "House Papers" in her grandmother's precise handwriting. She'd never looked inside, had simply stored it away after the funeral with the assumption that Richard would handle any legal matters. Richard always handled legal matters. It was easier, he'd said, more efficient to have the lawyer in the family manage such things. But sitting here in the aftermath of her son's cruelty, Karen felt a spark of the old curiosity that once driven her to dig deep into market research, to uncover the details others overlooked. She opened the envelope and spread the papers across her bedspread. The house deed lay among the documents, official and imposing. Karen scanned the legal language until her eyes found the ownership information. There, in black and white, Karen Rose Williams, sole owner. She read it again, certain she'd misunderstood, but the words remained unchanged. The house, this entire house where her family lived and ate and dismissed her contributions, belonged to her alone. A memory surfaced from 24 years ago, Richard's voice explaining the inheritance paperwork. "It's easier this way, honey, less complicated for taxes. We'll get it all sorted out later." Later had never come. In the blur of new motherhood and the overwhelming responsibility of managing household and baby, Karen had trusted her lawyer husband to handle the details. And Richard, busy with his burgeoning career and the comfortable assumption that such things didn't really matter in a marriage, had simply forgotten. Karen set the deed aside with careful precision and picked up a photograph from the chest. her grandmother at 40, standing outside this very house with the fierce pride of a woman who'd bought her own home with money she'd earned herself. Rose had been widowed young, had raised 3 children alone while running a small catering business from her kitchen. She'd never remarried, had valued her independence too much to surrender it again. "Never let them make you small," Karen, Rose had said during one of their last conversations. "The moment you stop taking up space, they'll forget you were ever there." The irony was devastating. Here Karen sat in a house that belonged to her, and a life she'd built through her own inheritance, feeling like an unwelcome guest. She'd made herself so small, so accommodating, so invisible, that her own family had forgotten she was a person with agency and rights and the power to say no. Another photograph caught her attention. Rose at 60, standing beside a sold sign. She'd downsized then, had sold the family home to buy a smaller place closer to town. "Why stay somewhere that's too big for your life?" she asked when Karen questioned the decision. "Houses should serve us, not the other way around." Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Working late again. Don't wait up." The casual dismissal stung, but it also clarified something. He wasn't staying late because the Morrison case demanded it. He was staying late because coming home meant facing the tension Derek had created, meant dealing with the emotional labor of family conflict. As always, Richard was choosing the easier path, leaving Karen to manage the mess alone. But Karen wasn't alone. Not really. She owned this house. She had legal standing, financial independence through her inheritance, and something else she'd forgotten she possessed: options. With shaking hands, she picked up her phone and dialed Rosa's number. "Karen, everything okay, honey? You sound—" "Rosa, I need to ask you something." Karen's voice was steadier than she felt. "When you divorced Miguel, when did you know it was time?" A pause. Then Rosa's warm voice, careful but encouraging. "When I realized I was living for everyone except myself. When I understood that staying was killing who I used to be." Another pause. "What happened?" Karen found herself telling Rosa everything. Derek's lies, his cruel assessment, Richard's passive enablement. "He called me furniture, Rosa. Furniture! That boy needs sense knocked into him," Rosa said fiercely. "But Karen, what are you going to do about it?" The question hung in the air. What was she going to do? For 23 years, Karen's response to family conflict had been to absorb it, to smooth it over, to make herself small until the problem passed. But furniture didn't have feelings to hurt or boundaries to violate. Furniture was passive, useful, easily replaced. Karen was none of those things. "I'm going to do some research," she heard herself say. "I need to understand my options." After hanging up, Karen opened her laptop, the one she used for managing household finances and online shopping for others' needs. This time, she used it for herself. She typed "Legal Rights Homeowner Connecticut" into the search bar. The information that populated her screen was illuminating. As the sole owner of the property, she had rights she'd never exercised, powers she'd never considered. The house was hers. Not theirs, hers. She could decide who lived here, who stayed, who had to leave. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She dug deeper, reading about tenant rights and property law, about the legal process for establishing residency and terminating it. The language was dry and clinical, but it painted a picture of possibilities Karen had never imagined. A soft knock interrupted her research. "Mom?" Lily's voice, tentative and worried. "Come in, sweetheart." Lily entered carrying 2 cups of tea, her face showing the strain of the evening's conflict. At 22, she'd inherited Karen's empathy, but also her grandmother's backbone, a combination that had served her well in her new job, but made family dynamics particularly difficult.
Now back to the story. "I heard what Derek said," Lily said, settling on the bed beside her mother. "I wanted to check on you. I'm all right." The lie came automatically. Then Karen caught herself. Actually, no, I'm not all right. But I think I might be done pretending that I am. Lily's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't the accommodating mother she was used to, the one who smoothed over Derek's edges and excused his behavior. What Derek said was unforgivable, Lily said quietly. You know that, right? You're not furniture. You're the reason this family functions at all. The validation was balm to Karen's wounded spirit, but it also clarified something else. Lily saw the truth of their family dynamic, had always seen it. Karen wasn't imagining the imbalance, the disrespect, the casual cruelty of being taken for granted. I've been looking at some legal documents, Karen said, gesturing to the papers spread across the bed. Did you know this house belongs to me? Just me? Lily's eyebrows rose. What do you mean? Karen explained about the inheritance, the deed, Richard's forgotten promise to sort it out later. Lily listened with the sharp attention of a young woman who'd learned not to trust assumptions about how the world worked. So, legally, Lily said slowly, you could decide who lives here. Legally, yes. And Derek just told you that you're furniture in your own house? Yes. Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing. What are you thinking, Mom? Karen looked at her daughter, this bright, independent woman who was just beginning to understand the compromises her mother had made, and felt something crystallize inside her chest. A decision, maybe, or just the first glimpse of one. I'm thinking, Karen said carefully, that furniture doesn't get to make choices, but homeowners do. The words hung between them, loaded with possibility and threat. For the first time in 23 years, Karen Williams was considering what her life might look like if she stopped living for everyone else and started living for herself. Outside her window, Rose's house glowed with warm light, a beacon of what life after accommodation might look like. And in her hands, the deed to her grandmother's house felt less like a piece of paper and more like a key to a door she'd forgotten existed, the door to a life where she wasn't furniture at all, but the architect of her own space.
Marcus set down his pen and leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Williams, in my experience, people don't use language like that casually. That level of dismissiveness suggests a pattern of disrespect that's been building for some time. The validation hit Karen like a physical relief. Here was a professional, a stranger, confirming what she'd been afraid to acknowledge even to herself. Yes, she said simply. Yes. That's exactly what it is. Tell me about the house situation. You said your name is the only one on the deed. Karen pulled out the documents she'd copied that morning. My grandmother left it to me when she died. My husband, Richard, is a lawyer, corporate law, and he said he'd handle adding his name for tax purposes. But life got busy with a new baby, and it just never happened. Marcus examined the deed carefully. This is pretty straightforward. You're the sole owner of the property. That gives you significant rights, including the right to determine who lives there. Even though my family has been living there for over 20 years, even then, length of residency doesn't create ownership rights for non-family members, and the family relationship doesn't override your legal ownership. He paused. However, there are practical and emotional considerations we should discuss. Karen felt her heart rate quicken. Such as? If you're considering asking family members to leave, there are legal procedures to follow. Even though you own the house, you can't simply change the locks tomorrow. Connecticut law requires proper notice, even for family members. What kind of notice? For adult children living in your home, typically 30 days written notice. For a spouse, Marcus hesitated. That becomes more complicated, especially in a long-term marriage where both parties have contributed to the household. Karen felt a flicker of disappointment. So I can't just ask them to leave? You can ask, but if they refuse, you'd need to follow legal eviction procedures. And, Mrs. Williams, I have to ask, is this something you're seriously considering, or are you exploring options to feel more empowered in family discussions? The question forced Karen to confront something she'd been dancing around since last night. Was she really prepared to evict her own family, or was she just fantasizing about having power she'd never exercise? I don't know, she admitted
Part of me wants to understand what's possible. Part of me is tired of being treated like I don't matter in my own home. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Those are both valid reasons to seek legal counsel. Let me ask you this. Have you considered family therapy? Sometimes having a neutral professional facilitate conversations can help family members understand how their behavior affects others. My husband avoids conflict. My son thinks he's entitled to our support indefinitely. I'm not sure therapy would help. It might not, but courts prefer to see that alternative dispute resolution was attempted before granting evictions, especially in family situations. Karen absorbed this information, feeling both empowered and overwhelmed. If I did decide to proceed, what would the process look like? First, written notice to each person you want to leave. 30 days for adult children, but again, spousal situations are complex. If they don't leave voluntarily, you'd file for eviction in housing court. The process typically takes 2 to 3 months. And then they'd have to leave? If the court grants the eviction, yes. But, Mrs. Williams, I want you to understand the potential consequences. This would likely end your marriage and permanently damage your relationship with your son. Are you prepared for that possibility? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Was she prepared to lose her family to save herself? The old Karen would have immediately said no, would have backed down to preserve relationships at any cost, but the old Karen had been dismissed as furniture in her own home. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, this is a significant decision that shouldn't be rushed. Marcus pulled out a business card. My direct number is on here. If you decide to move forward, we'll need to discuss strategy and timing. If you decide family therapy might be worth trying first, I can recommend several excellent therapists who specialize in family systems. Karen took the card, feeling its weight like a promise. What would you do in my situation? Marcus smiled fadly. I can't answer that, Mrs. Williams, but I can tell you that in 20 years of family law, I've learned that people who feel genuinely valued and respected usually don't end up in my office. The fact that you're here suggests something fundamental needs to change. As Karen left the office, her mind buzzed with new information and possibilities. The legal system would support her if she chose to act. She had options beyond accommodation and endurance. For the first time in decades, she possessed real power in her family dynamic. The question now was whether she had the courage to use it. Driving home through the familiar streets of her suburban neighborhood, Karen caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her appeared different somehow, not younger, but more present, more substantial, less like furniture and more like someone who owned the house. Karen pulled into her driveway with the measured calm of someone who had crossed an invisible threshold. The consultation with Marcus Thompson had shifted something fundamental in her perspective. She was no longer a woman trapped by circumstances, but a homeowner with legal standing and options. The distinction felt profound. She sat in her car for a moment studying the house that had been her prison and was now revealing itself as her fortress. The Tudor-style architecture her grandmother loved, the carefully maintained landscaping Karen had tended for decades, the windows she'd dressed with curtains chosen to create warmth and welcome, all of it belonged to her, solely to her. Inside the house felt different. Not physically. Richard's briefcase still sat on the hall table, Derek's sneakers were still scattered by the front door, and the familiar sense of coffee and fabric softener still lingered in the air. But Karen moved through the space with new awareness, seeing it not as a place where she served others, but as property she controlled. She went directly to her home office, a small room off the kitchen that she had used primarily for managing household finances and coordinating family schedules. Tonight, she would use it for something else entirely, strategic planning. From her file cabinet, she extracted folders that documented 23 years of careful record-keeping. Karen had always been meticulous about finances, a habit inherited from her grandmother and reinforced by her marketing background. Every bank statement, every tax return, every major purchase had been documented and filed. What she was looking for now was evidence of financial patterns, proof of who contributed what to their household economy. The numbers told a stark story. Richard's salary supported their lifestyle, certainly, but Karen's inheritance had provided the down payment for the house.
Her careful budgeting and household management had stretched their income to cover not just necessities, but Derek's expensive tastes and Lily's college education. She'd been the unpaid financial manager of a complex operation, making their money work harder through planning and sacrifice. More importantly, she'd been funding Derek's prolonged adolescence with her own inheritance money, the emergency fund she'd maintained separately, money her grandmother had left specifically for Karen's security and independence. The irony was bitter. She'd been using her grandmother's gift of independence to enable her son's dependence. Karen opened her laptop and began a new document, Household Financial Analysis. Years of marketing experience had taught her the power of data presentation. If this situation escalated to legal proceedings, she wanted documentation that clearly demonstrated the household's financial reality. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Client dinner running late, home by 10. Karen stared at the message, recognizing it for what it was, an escape. Richard sensed the tension from yesterday's confrontation and was avoiding it, leaving her to manage the emotional aftermath alone. The pattern was so familiar, she'd stopped noticing it, but tonight it felt like evidence. She added a new section to her document, Division of Emotional Labor. The sound of Derek's footsteps on the stairs interrupted her work. He appeared in the kitchen wearing yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled, moving with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never questioned his welcome. "Hey, Mom." His tone was carefully neutral, testing the waters after yesterday's explosion. "Derek." Karen's voice was equally neutral, giving nothing away. He opened the refrigerator, surveying the contents with the expectation of finding meal options that had appeared without his involvement. "What's for dinner?" The question that would have once sent Karen into automatic meal planning mode now hung in the air like a challenge. She looked at her 25-year-old son, this grown man who'd called her furniture and was now expecting her to feed him, and felt something cold settle in her chest. "I don't know," she said simply. "What are you making?" Derek's hand paused on the refrigerator door. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm busy tonight. You'll need to handle your own dinner." He turned to face her, confusion creeping into his expression. This wasn't the accommodating mother he was used to, the one who absorbed his cruelty and continued serving his needs. "Are you still mad about yesterday?" "Mad?" She considered the word. "No, Derek, I'm not mad. I'm making some decisions." "What kind of decisions?" Karen looked at her son, this young man she'd shaped and nurtured and apparently failed to teach basic respect, and made her first strategic choice. "I'm deciding that furniture doesn't cook dinner. You said I was just furniture, so I'm acting like it." Derek's face cycled through emotions, surprise, irritation, then the calculating look of someone trying to determine how much genuine change was occurring versus how much was just maternal drama that would blow over. "Come on, Mom. I was upset yesterday. I didn't mean it literally." "Didn't you?" The simplicity of the question seemed to catch him off guard. Derek had always been able to charm or manipulate his way out of consequences, but something in Karen's tone suggested his usual tactics wouldn't work tonight. "Look, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, okay? But you were being really intense about the job thing, and I just snapped." Karen noted the non-apology, the deflection of responsibility, the assumption that hurt feelings were the extent of the damage. "I see. So we're good." "No, Derek, we're not good." He stared at her for a long moment, perhaps beginning to understand that something fundamental had shifted. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything. I want you to think about what you said, what it meant, and what you're going to do differently going forward." "Fine, whatever. I'll order pizza." Karen watched him retreat to his room, phone already in hand. The interaction confirmed what she'd suspected. Derek saw yesterday's confrontation as a temporary inconvenience, not a wake-up call. He expected to ride out her displeasure and return to the comfortable status quo where his needs were automatically met. He was wrong. Karen returned to her computer and opened a new browser window.
Her first search was straightforward: Connecticut eviction notice template. The legal forms appeared with clinical efficiency, official documents that could transform family relationships into legal proceedings. She downloaded the forms but didn't open them yet. First, she needed to complete her preparation. Her next search was more complex: Women's Shelter Services, Connecticut. The results painted a picture of an infrastructure she'd never needed to consider: support systems for women escaping difficult situations, rebuilding their lives, starting over. The website spoke of empowerment, independence, second chances. One organization caught her attention: New Horizons Women's Center. Their mission statement resonated: providing safe space and practical support for women creating new lives of dignity and purpose. Karen bookmarked the site and several others. If she was going to disrupt her family's comfortable assumptions, she needed to understand what resources were available, both for herself and potentially for other women in similar situations. The thought surprised her. Was she really considering not just leaving her family, but helping others do the same? At 9:30, she called her mother. "Karen, dear, this is late for you to be calling." Eleanor's voice carried the automatic concern of someone who'd raised children to follow predictable patterns. "I know, Mom. I wanted to talk to you about something important." "Is everything all right? Is Richard okay?" The immediate assumption that any unusual behavior indicated a male family member's crisis was not lost on Karen. "Richard's fine. It's about me, actually." "Oh." A pause, as if Eleanor was recalibrating her attention. "What about you?" Karen had rehearsed this conversation, knowing her mother's traditional values would create resistance to what she was contemplating. "I'm having some problems with Derek and with Richard's response to Derek." "What kind of problems?" "Derek hasn't been looking for work like he claimed. He's been lying to us and spending money on entertainment instead of job searching. When I confronted him about it, he became very disrespectful." Eleanor made the sympathetic noises of someone who'd raised her own challenging children. "Boys that age can be difficult, dear. He'll mature."
"He's 25, Mom. And what he said," Karen paused, then decided on honesty. "He told me I was just furniture in the house, that furniture doesn't get to have opinions." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Karen wondered if the call had dropped. "He said what?" Eleanor's voice had gone very quiet. "That I was furniture, just there, taking up space." And what did Richard say when he heard this? Nothing meaningful. He tried to smooth it over without addressing the disrespect. Another pause. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice carried an edge Karen rarely heard. "Your grandmother didn't raise you to be anyone's furniture." The words hit Karen like validation from beyond the grave. "No, she didn't. What are you going to do about it?" The question was the same one Marcus Thompson had posed, the one Rosa had implied, the one Karen had been asking herself. What was she going to do? "I'm exploring my options," Karen said carefully. "Good, because that boy needs to learn that actions have consequences, and Richard needs to remember that marriage means standing up for your wife." After hanging up, Karen sat in the quiet of her office, surrounded by financial documents and legal research, feeling something like clarity settling over her. Her mother's unexpected support had removed one potential source of guilt from the equation. At 10:15, Richard's car pulled into the driveway. Karen saved her work, closed her laptop, and went upstairs to bed. She didn't wait up to discuss Derek's behavior or her growing determination. Let Richard notice or not notice the shift in household dynamics. Let him interpret her absence as sulking or strategic withdrawal. Karen was done managing everyone else's emotional needs. In her bedroom, she pulled out the manila envelope containing the house deed and set it on her nightstand where she could see it. Tomorrow, she would make more phone calls, complete more research, finalize more plans. Tonight, she would sleep in her own house, in her own bed, as the sole owner of her domain. The knowledge felt like armor against whatever battles lay ahead. Downstairs, she heard Richard moving through his evening routine, checking locks, turning off lights, the familiar sounds of a man securing a house he believed he had equal claim to. He was wrong about that, too. Karen woke before dawn with the crystalline clarity that sometimes accompanies life-altering decisions. She'd slept better than she had in weeks, her body finally releasing tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The house deed still lay on her nightstand, catching the early morning light like a talisman. She dressed with the same strategic care she'd used for the lawyer consultation. Navy slacks, white blouse, low heels. Professional. Unshakable. The woman in the mirror looked different from the one who'd prepared Derek's unappreciated breakfast just 3 days ago. This woman had steel in her spine and purpose in her eyes. Downstairs, Karen moved through her kitchen with quiet efficiency, but she wasn't preparing anyone else's breakfast. Instead, she made herself coffee and toast, sitting at the island with the morning light streaming through windows she'd chosen in a house that belonged to her. At exactly 8 o'clock, she heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen already dressed for court, moving with the brisk energy of someone whose day was mapped in billable hours. "Morning," he said, reaching for the coffee pot that Karen had made for herself. "Running late today." "Richard." Karen's voice stopped him mid-reach. "We need to talk." He glanced at his watch, the automatic gesture of someone who measured conversations against their impact on his schedule. "Can it wait until tonight? The Morrison case." "No, it can't wait." Something in her tone made him look at her directly for the first time in days. Karen saw the moment he registered the change in her demeanor, the way his lawyer's instincts sharpened when confronted with unexpected variables. "Okay," he said carefully, setting down his coffee mug. "What's this about?" "Derek, and your response to Derek, and the fundamental disrespect both of you have shown me in my own home." Richard's shoulders tensed. This was the conversation he'd been avoiding since Tuesday night, the emotional cleanup he'd hoped would resolve itself without his involvement. "Karen, Derek was out of line, but nothing." Karen's voice carried the authority she'd once used to command boardrooms. "He called me furniture, Richard, in the house I own, and you said nothing meaningful to defend me. I told him it was inappropriate. You told him I was sure we could work it out. You treated his cruelty like a scheduling conflict that needed gentle management." Richard's legal training kicked in, searching for the path of least resistance. "What do you want me to do? He's our son. We can't just—" "Actually, we can." Karen stood and walked to the counter where she had placed 3 manila envelopes, each labeled with a family member's name. "Especially since this is my house." "Our house," Richard corrected automatically. "No, this is my house, solely mine according to the deed you forgot to modify 24 years ago." She watched his face as understanding dawned. Richard's legal mind was quick. He could see where this was heading even before she handed him the envelope. "Karen, what is this?" 30 days' notice to vacate the premises. The silence that followed felt crystalline and dangerous. Richard opened the envelope with the careful precision of someone handling a document that might explode. His face went very pale as he read the legal language. "You're evicting us." "I'm evicting Derek for his disrespect and dishonesty. I'm evicting you for enabling him and failing to defend me in my own home." "This is insane." Richard's voice rose slightly, his composure cracking. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." "Karen, we're married. We've been married for 26 years. You can't just throw me out because what? Because I finally got tired of being invisible? Because I decided I deserved respect in my own home." Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Derek's arrival. He appeared in yesterday's clothes, hair disheveled, moving with the casual expectation of someone who'd never faced real consequences.
He stopped short when he saw the tension in the room. "What's going on?" Karen picked up the envelope with his name and held it out. "Your notice to vacate." Derek stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "What do you mean, vacate?" "I mean you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." He looked between his parents, waiting for Richard to intervene, to smooth this over like every other consequence Derek had faced in his adult life. When Richard remained silent, Derek's face shifted from confusion to anger. "You're kicking me out because of what I said?" "Because of who you are," Karen replied calmly.
A grown man who lies to his parents, takes their money under false pretenses, and treats his mother like an object when confronted with his behavior. I apologized for that. No, you didn't. You said you were sorry if I hurt your feelings, which isn't the same thing. Derek's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. You can't just kick your own family out of their home. It's not your home, Derek. It's my home. You've been a guest here for 25 years, and guests who call their host furniture aren't welcome anymore. Dad, tell her she's being crazy. Richard's silence stretched uncomfortably. Karen could see him calculating, trying to find a legal angle that might preserve his comfortable life without forcing him to confront the emotional reality of their family's dysfunction. Actually, Richard said slowly, your mother is within her legal rights. As the sole property owner, she can determine who lives here. Derek's jaw dropped. You're taking her side? I'm stating legal facts. Jesus Christ, Derek exploded. This is insane. You're destroying our family over hurt feelings. Lower your voice, Karen said quietly. This is still my house. Fine. You want to play hardball? I'll call a lawyer. I'll sue for tenant rights or something. You can't just... Derek. Karen's voice cut through his bluster. Read the notice. You have 30 days. What you do with that time is up to you. The sound of the front door opening interrupted the confrontation. Lily's voice called out, Mom, I brought coffee and... She appeared in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. What's happening? Karen handed her the third envelope. I'm making some changes to our living arrangements. Lily opened the notice, her expression growing more serious as she read. Unlike her brother and father, she didn't immediately protest or search for loopholes. Instead, she looked at Karen with something approaching understanding. Because of what Derek said? Because of what Derek said and how your father responded to it. Because I'm tired of being treated like furniture in my own home. This is fucking insane, Derek snarled. Lily, tell her she's lost her mind. Lily looked at her brother with an expression Karen had never seen before. Complete disgust. Actually, Derek, I think this is overdue. What? You've been treating Mom like shit for years. We all have, but you're the worst. You lie, you take advantage, you're cruel when she tries to help you. What did you think would happen? I thought my family would act like family instead of throwing me out on the street. Family means treating each other with respect. When was the last time you showed Mom any respect? Derek's face contorted with frustrated rage. I don't have to listen to this bullshit. Mom, you want me gone? Fine. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize you made a mistake. I won't, Karen said simply. The finality in her voice seemed to penetrate Derek's anger. For the first time, he appeared to understand that his usual tactics, charm, manipulation, emotional blackmail, weren't going to work. You're really doing this, he said, his voice smaller now. Yes. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem to solve anymore. Derek stared at her for a long moment, perhaps seeing her mother clearly for the first time in years. What she saw there was the steel core, the unshakable resolve. The women who'd once commanded corporate respect seemed to finally convince him that this wasn't maternal drama that would blow over. Fuck this, he muttered, storming toward the stairs. Fuck all of this. The sound of his bedroom door slamming echoed through the house. In the kitchen, the 3 remaining family members stood in the aftermath of an explosion that had been building for decades. Richard cleared his throat. Karen, I understand you're upset, but surely we can discuss this rationally. Perhaps some family counseling. I'm past counseling, Richard. I'm past discussing. I'm past being rational while everyone else gets to be emotional and selfish and cruel. So what happens now? Lily asked quietly. Karen looked at her daughter, the only family member who'd shown any capacity for genuine self-reflection, and felt her resolve soften slightly.
That depends on whether people are willing to change how they treat me. And if we are, then we'll see what's possible. But the days of taking me for granted in my own home are over. Richard was still studying the eviction notice, his legal mind searching for escape clauses. This seems rather extreme, Karen.
Perhaps if we established some ground rules. The ground rules are simple, Richard. Treat me with respect or find somewhere else to live. The choice is yours. For the first time in 26 years of marriage, Richard Morrison found himself facing a problem that couldn't be solved with legal maneuvering or professional detachment. His wife, this woman he'd somehow stopped seeing as a complete person, was no longer asking for his attention or consideration. She was demanding it. And for the first time in decades, Karen Williams felt like something more than furniture. She felt like the owner of her own life. The silence that settled over the house after Derek's explosive exit felt different from any quiet Karen had experienced in 26 years of marriage. It wasn't the strained silence of people avoiding difficult conversations or the empty silence of being ignored. This was the profound quiet of a space finally belonging to its owner. She stood in her kitchen, still holding Lily's eviction notice, watching her daughter's face process the magnitude of what had just occurred. Richard had retreated to his study, presumably to research legal options that might restore his comfortable life without requiring genuine change. The sound of Derek throwing things into bags upstairs punctuated the morning like angry percussion. "Mom," Lily said quietly, "are you okay?" The question was simple, but it was the first time in years anyone had asked about Karen's well-being without expecting her to minimize or dismiss her own needs. "I think I will be," Karen replied, surprised by how true it felt. "What you're doing, it's brave." "It doesn't feel brave, it feels necessary." Lily nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "I've been thinking about what Derek said about you being furniture, and I realized we've all been treating you that way. Maybe not as cruelly as he did, but we've all just assumed you'd always be there, always accommodating, always putting everyone else first." The recognition hit Karen like validation she'd been craving without knowing it. Her youngest child, at least, could see the truth of their family dynamic. "I stayed with Rosa last night. She told me about when she divorced Uncle Miguel. She said the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was realizing how long she'd been gone from herself." Derek's footsteps thundered down the stairs, followed by the sound of the front door slamming. Through the window, Karen watched him throw duffel bags into the back of his car with violent efficiency. He didn't look back at the house, didn't pause to consider what he was leaving behind. The gesture felt symbolic. Derek had never really seen the home Karen had created, only the services it provided. Richard emerged from his study, holding his phone and briefcase. "I'll be staying at the Hartford Marriott while we sort this out," he announced, his tone carefully neutral. "I'll have my assistant send over the information for reaching me." Karen noted the clinical language, the way he framed their marriage crisis as a logistical problem requiring administrative solutions. Even in upheaval, Richard couldn't bring himself to acknowledge the emotional reality of what was happening. "Richard," she said as he moved toward the door. He paused, hope flickering across his face. Perhaps he thought she was having second thoughts, that this was all an elaborate bid for attention that he could now negotiate down to manageable proportions. "The bills will continue to come here," Karen said practically. "The mortgage, utilities, property taxes. I'll handle them as I always have." His face fell slightly. "Of course. We'll need to discuss financial arrangements." "Yes, we will. Through our lawyers." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Richard's mouth opened as if to protest, then closed. He nodded once and left, his departure as quietly efficient as everything else in his life. Lily remained, perched on the edge of the kitchen island like a bird deciding whether to stay or fly. "Do you want me to go too?"
Karen looked at her daughter, this young woman who'd somehow retained empathy and self-awareness despite growing up in a household that taught her that women's needs came last. Do you want to stay? I want to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, what it means for our family. Then stay. But understand that things are going to be different now. I'm not going to be the same mother I was before. Good. That mother was disappearing. I've been watching it happen for years. The observation was both painful and liberating. Karen thought she'd been hiding her diminishment so well, protecting her family from the knowledge of how small she had become. But Lily had seen it all, had been watching her mother fade away in real time. After Lily left for work, Karen stood alone in her house for the first time in over 2 decades. The silence felt vast and full of possibility. She walked through the room slowly, seeing them with new eyes. The living room she'd decorated around Richard's preferences. The dining room where she'd hosted countless dinner parties for his colleagues. The guest room where Derek had been camping for 3 years while figuring out his life. Every space bore the imprint of her invisible labor, her careful curation of other people's comfort. But it also bore her own aesthetic sensibilities, her grandmother's influence, the home she'd been trying to create beneath the weight of everyone else's needs. In Derek's room, evidence of his occupancy lay scattered across surfaces. Empty energy drink cans, gaming equipment, clothes that she'd washed and folded countless times. The space felt like an archaeological site of her own enabling, each object a monument to a relationship that had gradually turned parasitic. Karen began gathering the detritus of Derek's extended adolescence, not to clean up after him one last time, but to reclaim the space for something better. The room had potential. Good light, hardwood floors, built-in shelving. It could be something beautiful if she could see past what it had become. Her phone rang as she was loading the 3rd garbage bag. Rose's name appeared on the screen like a lifeline. "How are you holding up, honey?" "They're gone," Karen said, surprised by the relief in her own voice. Derek left angry, Richard left calculating, and Lily stayed to understand. "And how does it feel?" Karen considered the question, testing her emotional state like checking a healing wound. "Quiet, but good quiet, if that makes sense. Like I can finally hear myself think." "It makes perfect sense. Mikael used to fill every silence with noise. TV, music, his own voice. I forgot what my own thoughts sounded like until he was gone." After they hung up, Karen made herself lunch. A real lunch, not the scattered bites she usually grabbed while preparing everyone else's meals. She sat at her kitchen table with a sandwich and salad, looking out at the garden she'd maintained for decades. The tomatoes were coming in well this year. She'd actually have time to enjoy them now. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor arrived unannounced, her silver hair perfectly styled, despite her obvious agitation. "Karen Marie Williams," she said, using the full name that had always signaled serious maternal displeasure. "What in God's name are you doing?" "Hello, Mother. Would you like some tea?"
I would like an explanation. Lily called me, said you've thrown everyone out of the house. Karen led her mother to the living room, noting Eleanor's sharp eyes taking inventory of any changes. "I've asked Derek and Richard to find other accommodations, yes." "Asked? Lily said you served them eviction papers." Legal notice ensures there's no confusion about expectations or timelines. Eleanor settled into the wingback chair she'd always favored, her posture rigid with disapproval. "Karen, marriage requires compromise. Families require forgiveness. You can't just dispose of people when they disappoint you." "I'm not disposing of anyone. I'm establishing boundaries." "By throwing your husband out of his own home?" "My home, Mother. The house is solely in my name." Eleanor's expression shifted, calculation replacing reflexive criticism. Her Depression-era survival instincts recognized the significance of property ownership.
Your grandmother's house? Yes. And Richard never added his name to the deed? No. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, and Karen could almost see her mother's internal struggle between traditional values and practical reality. Eleanor had lived through times when a woman's security depended entirely on her ability to maintain her own resources. "What did Derek say to you?" Eleanor asked, finally. Karen repeated Derek's furniture comment, watching her mother's face harden with each word. Eleanor had raised her children during an era when respect for parents was non-negotiable, when casual cruelty toward one's mother would have resulted in immediate and severe consequences. "That boy needs his attitude adjusted," Eleanor said grimly, "and Richard should have done it years ago." Richard has never held Derek accountable for anything. Every problem gets smoothed over, every consequence gets negotiated away. And now you're holding them both accountable. Yes. Eleanor studied her daughter with new attention, perhaps seeing past the accommodating wife and mother to the woman who'd once commanded corporate respect. What happens next? I'm not sure yet, but I know I can't go back to being invisible in my own life. Your grandmother would be proud of you. Rose never let anyone treat her like furniture. The validation from her traditional mother felt like permission Karen hadn't known she needed. After Eleanor left, the house settled back into its new quiet. Karen spent the evening on practical tasks, changing passwords on accounts, reviewing insurance policies, organizing documents. The administrative work of reclaiming her life felt both mundane and revolutionary. As darkness fell, she called Marcus Thompson's office and left a message requesting a follow-up appointment. Whatever came next, she wanted to be prepared. The phone rang just as she was heading to bed. Lily's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, I just wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay alone in the house." "I'm fine, sweetheart." "Actually, I'm better than fine." "Good. And, Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about being a different kind of mother. I think I'd like to get to know that woman." After hanging up, Karen walked through her house one more time, turning off lights and checking locks. But tonight, she wasn't securing someone else's home. She was protecting her own space, her own sanctuary. In her bedroom, she pulled out a notebook and began writing, not a list of household tasks or family obligations, but ideas, plans, possibilities for what this house could become if it truly served her vision instead of everyone else's comfort. The word refuge kept appearing in her notes, a place where women could find safety, rebuild their strength, rediscover their voices. Karen had always been good at creating welcoming spaces. Perhaps it was time to create one intentionally, purposefully, for people who needed it most. Outside her window, the suburban street was quiet and peaceful. Inside her house, Karen Williams was finally truly alone with her thoughts, and for the first time in decades, those thoughts were entirely her own. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of potential. 3 weeks after serving the eviction notices, Karen stood in what had been Derek's room watching contractors install soundproofing panels and additional electrical outlets. The space was being transformed into something she'd never imagined possible, a safe haven for women rebuilding their lives. The bathroom renovation should be complete by Friday. 2 separate entrances, like you requested, and the kitchenette will be fully functional. Karen nodded, studying the blueprints spread across a folding table. The house was being carefully divided into private living spaces while maintaining common areas for community and support. Her marketing background had proven invaluable in envisioning how to maximize both privacy and connection. And the security system. Installation begins Monday. Motion sensors, upgraded locks, emergency call buttons in each room. This place will be safer than Fort Knox. The irony wasn't lost on Karen. She was creating the kind of security for other women that she'd never thought to demand for herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "Coffee later? Want to hear about the new resident applications?" She smiled.
Rosa had become her unofficial partner in this endeavor, helping her navigate the complex world of women's services and nonprofit organizations. What had started as a simple desire to reclaim her space had evolved into something much larger. The transformation hadn't been easy. The legal paperwork alone had required weeks of consultation with Marcus Thompson and a nonprofit attorney. Zoning permits, safety inspections, licensing requirements. Karen had thrown herself into the bureaucratic maze with the focused intensity of her former marketing career. But for the first time in decades, she was building something that reflected her own values and vision. Mrs. Williams? A young woman appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I'm Sarah Kim, from New Horizons. We had an appointment to discuss the intake process. Of course, come in. Karen had been looking forward to this meeting. Dr. Sarah Kim ran the counseling services at New Horizons and would be providing therapeutic support for the women who came to stay at what Karen was calling Rose House, after her grandmother. They walked through the renovated spaces, Dr. Kim taking notes and asking practical questions about capacity, security, and house rules. The downstairs had been converted into common areas, a large kitchen for shared meals, a living room for group activities, a small library, and computer station. This is impressive, Dr. Kim said as they concluded the tour.
Most transitional housing feels institutional. This feels like a home. That was the goal. I wanted women to feel valued here, not just warehoused. How many residents are you planning to accommodate? 6 initially. Each woman gets her own room and bathroom, access to common areas, and support services. The goal is to help them stabilize and move toward independence. Dr. Kim reviewed her notes. I have 3 women who would be excellent candidates. Maria is escaping an abusive marriage with 2 teenage children. Janet is recovering from addiction and needs stable housing while she rebuilds her life. And Patricia is 68, recently divorced after 40 years of marriage with nowhere to go. Karen felt her chest tighten with recognition. Patricia's story could have been her own if she hadn't discovered her ownership of the house. How many women faced their later years with no resources, no support, no recognition of their decades of contribution to families that had discarded them? When can they move in? The contractors should be finished by next week. I'll need a few days to finalize house policies and stock the common areas. Shall we say 2 weeks from today? After Dr. Kim left, Karen stood in her transformed house feeling something she hadn't experienced in years: profound satisfaction with work that mattered. The marketing campaigns she'd once created had moved products and generated profits. This work was moving lives toward safety and dignity. Her phone rang with an unknown number. Hello? Mom, it's Derek. Karen's hand tightened on the phone. She hadn't heard from her son since he'd stormed out 3 weeks ago. His voice sounded different, less certain, more strained. Hello, Derek? Look, I'm calling because I need to get some more of my stuff from my room. There is no your room anymore. That space is being renovated. A pause. Renovated for what? Karen almost smiled at the entitlement implicit in the question, the assumption that she owed him explanations about her own property. For its new purpose. What new purpose? I'm converting the house into transitional housing for women who need safe places to rebuild their lives. The silence stretched so long that Karen wondered if the call had dropped. You're turning our house into a shelter? I'm turning my house into something useful and meaningful. Jesus, Mom, this is really what you want? A house full of strangers instead of your family? The question revealed Derek's fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. He still framed it as her choice between strangers and family, rather than his choice between respect and entitlement. Derek, where are you staying? With friends? But that's not, I can't stay there forever. I see. Look, maybe we could talk, figure out some kind of arrangement where I could come back. Karen felt the familiar tug of maternal instinct, the desire to smooth over conflict and restore family harmony. But the feeling was weaker now, overwhelmed by a clearer understanding of what arrangement meant to Derek. What kind of arrangement? I don't know, maybe I could help with the shelter thing. Be like a house manager or something. The suggestion was so tone-deaf that Karen almost laughed. Derek, who had never managed anything more complex than his gaming schedule, offering to manage a facility for vulnerable women. That's not going to work, Derek. Why not? I could change. I could be different. Could you? Because so far, this conversation sounds exactly like every other conversation we've had. You're not asking how I am, or acknowledging the pain you caused, or taking responsibility for your behavior. You're asking what you can get from me. Another long pause. That's not... I am sorry about what I said. What specifically are you sorry for? For saying, the furniture thing. It was mean. Karen waited for more, but Derek seemed to think this minimal acknowledgement constituted a full apology. Derek, you called me furniture because that's how you see me, as something that exists to serve your needs without having needs of my own. Until you understand why that's fundamentally wrong, we don't have much to talk about. So that's it? You're just going to cut me off forever? I'm going to live my life without accommodating people who treat me disrespectfully. If you ever want a relationship with me, you'll need to figure out how to be respectful. After hanging up, Karen felt the familiar ache of maternal love, complicated by disappointment, but she also felt something stronger, the knowledge that she'd chosen her own well-being over Derek's comfort, and the world hadn't ended. Her laptop chimed with an email from Richard's attorney requesting a meeting to discuss financial arrangements and potential reconciliation. Karen forwarded it to Marcus Thompson with a note. Please handle. I'm busy building something new. As the afternoon progressed, Karen found herself in her grandmother's garden, pulling weeds and planning where to plant vegetables for the house residents.
The physical work felt grounding, connecting her to the earth and to Rose's legacy of creating beauty from practical effort. Mom? Karen looked up to find Lily approaching with 2 iced coffees and a cautious smile. Thought you might be thirsty. They sat together on the garden bench Rose had installed decades earlier, looking at the house that was becoming something entirely new. It's beautiful what you're doing, Lily said. The women who will live here, they're lucky. I'm the lucky one. I get to do work that matters. Are you happy? The question caught Karen off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked about her happiness? When was the last time she'd considered it a valid priority? Yes, she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. For the first time in years, I'm happy. Lily nodded, then spoke carefully. I've been talking to Dad and Derek. Karen felt her shoulders tense. Oh? Dad's struggling. He keeps saying he doesn't understand how things got so bad. Derek's angry, but I think he's starting to realize he burned some bridges. What do you think I should do about that? Nothing. I think you should keep doing exactly what you're doing. Lily's voice grew stronger. I think for the first time in my life, I'm seeing who my mother really is, and I like her. That evening, as Karen reviewed applications for women seeking housing, she thought about happiness. It wasn't the contentment she'd once mistaken for satisfaction, the peace that came from everyone else being comfortable. This was something deeper, the joy of meaningful work, the satisfaction of using her skills for something important, the quiet pride of creating safety for others. Tomorrow, the first residents would arrive. Tomorrow, Rose House would begin its real work. And tomorrow, Karen Williams would wake up in a house that belonged entirely to her, filled with women who were learning what she'd learned, that they deserved better than being furniture in someone else's life. The transformation was complete, not just of the house, but of the woman who owned it. 6 weeks after the evictions, Karen sat in Dr. Sarah Kim's office, facing her displaced family across a circle of chairs that felt both intimate and confrontational. The therapy room was carefully neutral, soft lighting, muted colors, tissues strategically placed within reach of every seat. But neutrality couldn't disguise the tension crackling between family members who'd spent weeks living separate lives. Richard looked older.
his usually impeccable appearance slightly rumpled. The Marriott had provided comfort but not peace, and the strain of living out of suitcases while his wife transformed their home into a women's shelter had taken its toll. Derek appeared sullen and defensive, his charm dimmed by weeks of couch surfing and the growing realization that his friend's patience wasn't infinite. Lily sat closest to Karen, a deliberate choice that spoke volumes about family loyalties. "Thank you all for agreeing to these sessions," Dr. Kim began, her voice professionally warm but firm. "Before we start, I want to establish some ground rules. This is a safe space for honest communication, which means we speak respectfully to each other, we listen without interrupting, and we take responsibility for our own words and actions." Karen watched Derek's jaw tighten at the word responsibility. Even here, in a space designed for healing, he bristled at accountability. Who would like to begin by sharing their perspective on what brought the family to this point? Silence stretched across the circle. Karen realized that for all their years of family meetings about schedules and logistics, they'd never sat down to discuss feelings or relationships. The unfamiliarity of emotional honesty seemed to paralyze them. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "I think there's been a breakdown in communication, some misunderstandings that escalated beyond what anyone intended." Dr. Kim made a note. "Misunderstandings about what, specifically?" "Well, Derek said some things he shouldn't have." Karen responded more drastically than the situation warranted. "These things happen in families." Karen felt her familiar anger arise at Richard's clinical dismissal of Derek's cruelty and her response. He was already working to minimize the significance of what had happened, to frame it as mutual overreaction rather than confronting the deeper dysfunction. "Richard, I noticed you're describing the situation in very general terms. Can you be more specific about what Derek said and what Karen's response was?" Richard's discomfort was visible. His legal training had taught him to avoid specifics that might prove damaging, but therapy required the opposite approach. "Derek told Karen she was furniture in the house, and Karen served us with eviction papers." "I see. Derek, how do you feel about your father's description of what happened?" Derek shifted in his chair, his defensive posture suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. "I mean, yeah, I said something mean, but kicking your whole family out over one comment seems pretty extreme." "One comment?" repeated Karen quietly. "Is that really how you see it?" "Mom, look, I was frustrated about the job stuff and I said something stupid. But you've been on my case for months about finding work, and sometimes people snap." Dr. Kim leaned forward slightly. "Derek, can you help me understand what was happening in your life at that time? What was the job situation like for you?" Derek's eyes darted around the room, anywhere but at his family members. "I was looking. It's a tough market, and I had some leads that didn't work out." "Your mother mentioned that you discovered you weren't actually attending interviews. Can you tell me about that?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karen watched her son struggle with the foreign concept of taking responsibility for his actions in front of witnesses who wouldn't enable his usual deflections. "Sometimes I had interviews scheduled, but they got canceled or moved. And sometimes I needed to take breaks from the stress of job hunting. It's really hard putting yourself out there all the time."
So you were taking breaks by spending money your parents gave you for job-related expenses on entertainment instead? Derek's face flushed. That makes it sound worse than it was. How would you describe it? I don't know. I was stressed, okay? And yeah, maybe I bought some games or whatever to decompress. That doesn't make me a criminal. Dr. Kim turned to Karen. How did you feel when you discovered Derek wasn't being honest about his job search? Disappointed, Karen said, then caught herself. The old Karen would have stopped there, would have minimized her own feelings to protect Derek's comfort. Actually, more than disappointed. I felt betrayed. I'd been supporting him financially and emotionally, worrying about his future, making excuses for him to his father and my friends, and I realized he'd been lying to me for months. And when you tried to address this with him, what happened? He became defensive and angry.
Then he told me I was just furniture in the house, that furniture doesn't get to have opinions about what people do. Dr. Kim made another note. Derek, do you remember saying that? I remember being really frustrated. That's not what I asked. Do you remember calling your mother furniture? The directness of the question seemed to catch Derek off guard. Yeah, okay, I said that. But I was mad. Help me understand what you meant by calling her furniture. Derek squirmed, clearly wishing he could escape this line of questioning. I don't know, that she was being controlling, interfering in my life. By asking about your job search after giving you money for job-related expenses? It felt like being treated like a kid. You're 25 years old, living in your parents' house, being financially supported by them, and lying about your activities. Can you see how a parent might feel responsible for addressing that situation? Derek's silence spoke volumes. Lily, who'd been listening intently, finally spoke up. Derek, you called Mom furniture because you wanted her to shut up and leave you alone, while still taking care of you. You wanted her to be invisible until you needed something. Lily, that's not— Yes, it is. Lily's voice was firm, but not cruel. I've watched you treat Mom like a servant for years. We all have. The only difference is that day, you said it out loud. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Lily, that's a bit harsh. Derek was having a difficult time. Dad, stop. Lily turned to face her father directly. You do it too, maybe not as obviously, but you treat Mom like her job is to make your life comfortable while you ignore her emotional needs. Dr. Kim observed the family dynamics with professional interest. Richard, how do you respond to what Lily just said? Richard's legal mind was clearly struggling with the emotional territory. I've always provided for the family. I work long hours to maintain our lifestyle. I assumed Karen was satisfied with our arrangement. What arrangement was that? She managed the household. I handled the finances and career responsibilities. It seemed to work for 26 years. Did you ever ask Karen if she was satisfied with this arrangement? The question seemed to stump Richard. Karen watched him realize that he'd spent decades making assumptions about her contentment without actually ever checking. We didn't really discuss it explicitly, but she never complained. Karen, Dr. Kim said, did you feel able to complain, to express dissatisfaction with your role in the marriage? Karen considered the question carefully. No, Richard avoided conflict, so raising concerns meant I'd have to handle both the original problem and his discomfort with discussing it. It was easier to manage things myself. And what was the cost of that choice? I disappeared. Gradually, over years, I became smaller and smaller until I was just there. Useful, but invisible. The session continued for another 30 minutes, each family member forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their roles in the family's dysfunction. Derek struggled to move beyond defensiveness to genuine accountability. Richard slowly began to recognize his emotional absence and its impact. Lily emerged as the family's potential bridge, able to see clearly while maintaining love for them all. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Kim addressed the group. I want to be clear about something. Karen, you've made significant changes in your life and established new boundaries. The question for the rest of your family is whether you're willing to do the work necessary to meet her where she is now, rather than expecting her to return to where she was. What kind of work? Richard asked. Individual therapy for each of you to understand your own patterns. Learning to see Karen as a complete person with her own needs and desires. Developing genuine respect rather than just going through the motions. Derek looked skeptical.
Now back to the story. I heard what Derek said, Lily said, settling on the bed beside her mother. I wanted to check on you. I'm all right. The lie came automatically. Then Karen caught herself. Actually, no, I'm not all right. But I think I might be done pretending that I am. Lily's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't the accommodating mother she was used to, the one who smoothed over Derek's edges and excused his behavior. What Derek said was unforgivable, Lily said quietly. You know that, right? You're not furniture. You're the reason this family functions at all. The validation was balm to Karen's wounded spirit, but it also clarified something else. Lily saw the truth of their family dynamic, had always seen it. Karen wasn't imagining the imbalance, the disrespect, the casual cruelty of being taken for granted. "I've been looking at some legal documents," Karen said, gesturing to the papers spread across the bed. "Did you know this house belongs to me? Just me?" Lily's eyebrows rose. "What do you mean?" Karen explained about the inheritance, the deed, Richard's forgotten promise to sort it out later. Lily listened with the sharp attention of a young woman who'd learned not to trust assumptions about how the world worked. "So, legally," Lily said slowly, "you could decide who lives here." "Legally, yes." "And Derek just told you that you're furniture in your own house?" "Yes." Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing. "What are you thinking, Mom?" Karen looked at her daughter, this bright, independent woman who was just beginning to understand the compromises her mother had made, and felt something crystallize inside her chest. A decision, maybe, or just the first glimpse of one. "I'm thinking," Karen said carefully, "that furniture doesn't get to make choices, but homeowners do." The words hung between them, loaded with possibility and threat. For the first time in 23 years, Karen Williams was considering what her life might look like if she stopped living for everyone else and started living for herself. Outside her window, Rose's house glowed with warm light, a beacon of what life after accommodation might look like. And in her hands, the deed to her grandmother's house felt less like a piece of paper and more like a key to a door she'd forgotten existed, the door to a life where she wasn't furniture at all, but the architect of her own space.